All right, everyone, how's it going? Welcome to another episode of FPL Captain's Picks, where I go into the database of players on Fantasy Premier League and look at the three players that I think you should have as your captain on Fantasy Premier League this week to get the best returns possible. So, with no further ado, let's start off with James Milner of Liverpool. £6.4 million is all he costs on Fantasy Premier League. 90 fantasy points for the former England international. He was actually playing as a left back this season, but on Fantasy Premier League, he's still listed as a midfielder. So why should you pick Milner? Well, first up, he takes all the penalties for Liverpool, and Swansea have conceded 6 penalties so far this season in the Premier League. He has the joint highest bonus points total among Liverpool's midfielders, does Milner, and I think as he's only 5% owned, it gives you a bit of a differential against people that have maybe got Philippe Coutinho. Adam Lallana's 27.2% owned, so you can kind of see the amount of separation that you can get there. Milner actually has 6 goals and 2 assists already this season, which is very impressive. He's the 4th highest crosser of the ball in the Premier League as well, with 143. And considering he's a defender, that's way above any other defender in the Premier League. I think he's going to create plenty of chances. Plus, I reckon that low ownership, if you're drifting down your league and you really want to get someone in there that smashes everyone else out of the water, just like Marcos Alonso did last week, then I think Milner could be your man. So the second player that I've opted for is a man that plays for West Bromwich Albion, has been in great form so far this season, and that's Matty Phillips, who comes in. Again, he's a budget pick. He's £5.8 million on Fantasy Premier League right now. And the Baggies they haven't been relying on him as such, but he has been one of their best players this season. He's got 8 assists now, which is second only to Kevin De Bruyne, the Manchester City midfielder. And Sunderland, if you watched them last week, they looked absolute garbage. They've got Lamine Kone over at the African Cup of Nations, which has hit them hard. Didier Ndong went there as well. They're all about Jermaine Defoe, as I always say on these videos. He's now got 60% of their goals this season, which is quite incredible if you ask me. Phillips, slightly higher owned. He's at 20.1% right now. But when you've got Solomon Rondon in the team and you've got a West Brom team who, although they've lost 3 of the last 6 games, those 3 games have been against Arsenal, Manchester United and Tottenham Hotspur last week, of course, where they lost 4-0 and they were absolutely blown away in that game. Pulis tends to get his teams to really turn up for these matches against teams that are scrapping it out down the bottom. And I still think West Brom, if 2 of the big teams win the Carling Cup and the FA Cup, there's nothing to say West Brom can't sneak in there and get a Europa League place, and Phillips will be a big part of that if they do. So before I go for the final pick, just honourable mention for Alexis Sanchez, who is turning up for art. Did brilliantly last week. I had him as my captain. He ended up getting me, I think, 22 fantasy points last week, Alexis Sanchez. If you can afford him, I'd really recommend getting him in your team because he's just absolute money at the moment. And Junior Stanislas, who I think could have another big game this week for Bournemouth because they are playing against Watford, who have been absolutely awful recently. That clean sheet they kept last week, I think, was the first one they've had in 10 games. And Stanislas, of course, scored the penalty last week for Bournemouth. I don't fancy any of Bournemouth's defenders, but Stanislas is another option if you don't like the 3 that I've explained here. So getting back to my final option, it's Eden Hazard of Chelsea, £10.4 million on Fantasy Premier League. He's a huge 33.4% owned right now, but 126 points is the only midfielder that has more than that is actually Alexis Sanchez, who has quite a few more. But like Hazard, you always know what you're going to get. Very favourable fixture for Chelsea, of course, against Hull City. And I spoke about Swansea conceding penalties earlier. Hull have conceded 10 already this season. And they've got some really clumsy defenders back there. And I think Hazard's on penalties. So get him in your team. I think he'll get you plenty of points this week because, of course, Diego Costa's status, I think he's going to be back for this game on Sunday, but whether he starts is another question entirely. And also with Hazard, second best dribbler in the Premier League with 4.4 dribbles per game. Adama Traore is really far out in front at the top of that list, but Traore's end product is pretty much nothing, so whereas Hazard's is very, very good, although the 2 assists he's got skew that slightly, but he has scored 9 goals already this season. So that's the captain's picks for this game week, which is game week 22 on Fantasy Premier League. I hope you're doing well in your leagues and these videos are helping you out. If you like what you see on the channel, just click subscribe to the channel below. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up below. I appreciate all the feedback I get on these videos from you guys, so keep it coming in. And thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.